Hello and welcome to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast with me, your host, Shiv Sengupta. Today, my guest is a really interesting person who I'm looking forward to having a chat with, and his name is Ishtar Howell. Ishtar, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shiv.
So, Ishtar, you're joining us from Portugal, correct?
Correct.
But I'm guessing you were not born in Portugal. You're American, is my guess.
You have it. You have it exactly. I'm actually from the. I was born and raised in Wisconsin.
Cool. All right. So
Yes.
how did you end up in Portugal?
If I gave you the Beatles answer, it'd be a cheeky John Lennon answer, like took the plane or something like that. I met my wife. I didn't in Portland, Oregon, and it turned out that she was born and raised in Lisbon, Portugal. And we were never expecting to. We didn't have moving back to Portugal on either of our radars. We lived in a number of other places, and then all of us, sort of a sudden, in 2019, we both, had the sense that we weren't going to be in North America anymore, and we sort of wafted over to Europe. And Portugal, being her home country, was the place of least resistance, and that's where we are. It's actually kind of interesting. I was living in Vancouver in 2014, 2015, Canada, Vancouver, and I remember one time having a dream in 2014. I woke up and I said, "Oh my God, I had this dream that we're living in Portugal, but it's not one of the cities. We're living in a very rural, remote area." And then we just kind of laughed it off as unrealistic, and that's in fact exactly where we ended up. They're more we're sort of the olive trees rule where we live. So
beautiful. And it's so interesting you mentioned that, because something similar happened to me. I want to say about 15 years ago, when my now wife and I got together. Back then we were just dating. We weren't married, and I had a similar sort of premonition in a weird sort of way that I'd be living in a very rural part of Japan, right? And I'd never been to Japan. I'd been a city boy all my life. I've grown up in cities in India, in the Middle East, cities in North America, but urban jungles. Never known anything different. And then just strangely, and in a sort of uncanny way, this confluence of events just kind of led us to end up in this small town in northern Japan, the island of Hokkaido. And it turned into sort of one of the large chapters of my life. I lived there for close to 10 years. We raised our kids there.
Really?
Yeah, in a town that nobody spoke Japanese, right? Sorry, nobody spoke English. They just spoke only Japanese. I know, that'd be ideal. They spoke only Japanese. And I remember like putting my first daughter in daycare at the age of 2, and even the daycare teachers couldn't speak a single word of English. And so, here's this child who's only heard English in her home, boom, in the daycare where she's just immersed in this completely different culture and language. And both children thrived there, and they were speaking like the local dialect within a year's time, and as fluently as any other child. And it's just wild, right? When you have those kinds of experiences. So imagine living in a rural part of Portugal is very, very different from your upbringing in Wisconsin. And how does your family relate to that? The ones who are still back in the States? And
oh God, well, I think that they're quite pleased with that, and I'm hoping to receive some more visitors in the next year. So yeah, COVID was a bit of an interruption with plane flight being difficult, but yeah, I think everyone has that sort of, a positive experience of positive idea of Portugal in their mind, for sure.
And I think it's still one of the somewhat affordable countries in Western Europe to live in. And this is just based on my memories from spending part of my honeymoon there, as we were just talking before we started recording. But out of Croatia, Spain, and Portugal, Portugal was the most affordable at the time of the three countries we visited. And, you know, I think that's one of the things that draws a lot of Europeans to Portugal as well, is the quality of life, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I want to get into how you and I connected a little bit, because we have a mutual friend, Stephen Lupka, who incidentally I'm going to be doing the podcast with this Friday, and it's my third podcast with him, and I want to keep doing them until he becomes so famous that he's not going to have time to do one anymore, because he's caught that sort of Bitcoin wave, and he's a great guy. He's a pleasure to talk to every time I have him on. But that is how you and I connected on Facebook, was through that mutual acquaintance. And I love seeing your little posts come up every once in a while on my newsfeed. It's just the way the Facebook universe works. Because it is so kind of contrary to the kind of posts I typically read, right? You're aware that I'm a little bit of critic of the whole metaphysical spiritual industry. However, I'm not the throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of guy either. I see a lot of value in there, but there's just so much hype and bullshit wrapped around it that gets passed off as spirituality today. But it's something that's always rung authentic and true to me about you and the way you've come across your expression online. So I want to get in a little bit into your own background, Ishtar, and sort of, if you don't mind, for all those viewing this podcast, talk a little bit about your journey. I think it started off pretty young,
Early.
as it did for me, also very young. So talk a little about your journey, how that began, and then, the arc to where it's brought you to now.
Oh, absolutely. And please do interject as I'm going here. But you're right, it started quite early. Of course, I didn't ascribe any sort of I don't know, significance to the sort. One accepts the world they're born into, more or less, and I didn't exactly have a lot of time to compare notes when I was in the crib. So that's kind of where it started in crib world. And I recall waking very, very early, before my mother would get up, before sunrise, and I would just be sitting in my crib, and I'd be looking at my curtains. And
So hold on,
what was
you said I can interject. I want to interject here just once.
Yeah.
When you say you remember in your crib, like how old were you? Like what? And you had
I
memories
think I was
from.
under one. Yeah, I do. And I know I'm not supposed to have those according to my psychology classes in high school and university. That's not supposed to be the case, to have stable memories under 2.5 or something like that. So, I always held those lightly, and yet memory was always a extreme strong suit for me growing up. Being able to recall conversations is nearly eidetic. But I remember being taught how to walk. I don't know exactly when that happened. It was pretty young, because I remember either my mother or my sister on the other side of the living room with their arms open, trying to sort of beckon me to make it, and stumbling and falling quite a bit, and getting up and trying again. That was a big marker. Another big marker was being in a white bonnet, being carried around, being next to this big sort of big rectangle of water, and also being in my stroller and seeing these strange prehistoric looking birds, which later in looking through a picture book turned out to be peacocks. And so that was 6 months, because the only time I saw peacocks as a child was when I went to James Madison's house in Virginia. And so we knew the date. So they had a lot of these markers. I remember, climbing out of my crib for the first time. That was a huge bit of confidence building, because I'd been trying for a long time. Of course, then when I got out, I had no way of getting back in. So then I had to spend the night on the floor, just kind of like, oh, okay, we didn't think that through. But behind all these memories, why actually I think I have them, because behind them there was this very clear sense of I don't know, unity with things. I like that I would sort of fall into it, and I would then, the more I would fall into it, in a sense, I would feel it I would see it in the curtains, or I would see it in my mother, or my father and my sister, and I would see it in my crib. And this was kind of a game for me, to sort of a perceptual game, and it was quite therapeutic at the same time, which is why I think I played it, because I had a very good feeling arise in my little baby body when I would do this. And so this kind of went on for a while. Then I started learning language, and language didn't kick me out of that perceptual realm. So I never see it as the big bugbear that a lot of people in I don't know, contemporary spirituality tend to, because I remember learning pronouns and obnoxiously learning language and going around and pointing at things, what dis, and saying, that's me. Uh, that's me. And I would be pointing at like a bookcase or a shelf. And when I would say it, I had a sense that that was me, and not only focalized into the little body. And so that was a very interesting part of childhood, which I didn't have of course didn't have a sense was anything that other people would consider interesting until looking back much later. And with that came a lot of more woo-woo stuff. I was glad that my parents allowed me to encourage me to have an imagination, because I remember once in the crib, a lady walked into my room. It was not uncommon for my bed, the bed across from the crib, to have guests in it, and I would look at the guests all night long, sort of staring at them. I'm not quite sure why I did that. So that wasn't unusual to have people walk in the room late at night. This lady came in. She looked like my grandmother, except she was about a foot taller, had the same puffy white hair, had a blue nightgown. And I looked at her. She didn't look at me, but I felt her. I suppose I felt her awareness on me, and it felt good, and felt I had no reason to fear this woman. And I watched her walk past my crib and walk to the end of the room, and then she walked clear through the back wall. But I'd never seen anybody walk through the back wall before. So I thought to myself, someday when I'm able to get out of this crib, I'm going to try that out and do that. And that sort of initiated me into this other sort of realm, which people in spirituality don't always think so fondly of, like maybe they don't want to pollute their waters with such woo stuff, but ghosts. That was a big part of my childhood as well. I think kind of a stressful part, to a certain degree, because I would get visitors, and they weren't all like the first lady, which I later figured was probably my recently deceased great grandmother. Look, spitting image of her. So that kind of happened, and we went like anybody else, and we went and sort of gleefully took part in the development of an ego. I was at my parent-teacher conference in kindergarten with my mother, and my teacher was just talking to my mother, not really talking to me. She said, "Oh, he's got a great personality." So then after the session, I had to ask my mom, "What's a personality?" And then she sort of explained it. And then when she explained personality, the concept, the light bulb went off in my head, because I was quite curious about why my parents behaved in certain ways, and why anybody behaved in certain ways. Because to me, they seemed to often speak what I knew they weren't feeling. They were carrying on. There was a dissonance between what I felt internally was going on in them and what's externally, and I was completely confused by that. But once she explained the personality, it all came to my mind. It's like, oh, it's a filtration system where the inputs of life go through a translation process and produce different outputs. And it's like, I've got to have me one of those. That sounds fascinating. And so for the next month or two or something like that, I was the baby of the family, so I was babied quite a bit. My mother put my clothes on up till I got age 6 or something like that. And so for the next 2 months of having my clothes put on, I would tell my mother, now today, like as if I was an actor, which I would say, today, I have a fear of this, this, and this, which causes me to behave in this, this, and this way. And I like this. I no longer like what I liked yesterday. Now I dislike it, and I like this. And I would kind of go through a whole, kind of list, and it was great fun, because I felt like I'm playing everybody's game now. I'm in the game. And yeah, then at some point, it just, one of them stuck organically, and it wasn't, then I, I was also trying to use it to avoid unpleasant encounters with the other kids in grade school, because I absolutely hated the first environment I disliked in my life. I was lucky to have a really nice womb-like nuclear family home space, and going to public school was rough because nobody told me it wasn't good to be eccentric uh, and outspoken uh, at home, and I found out that those were often very bad things in school. And so I came up with an idea because I noticed my sister was having social difficulties. She was 7 years older, and I thought I'd come up with a helpful insight. So remember going into her room in about first grade and said, I've figured out, how to, how to not be picked on so much. I can tune into any particular person. I can see what they want, what they like and dislike, and I can provide I can produce a persona to anybody so they won't bother me. And then she said, watch out, that's a bad idea, because you'll lose yourself. And I very confidently, in a cocksure way, said, no, I won't. You'll see. I'll be fine. Then about a year later, I walked in, and I said, oh, it happened. I forgot who the hell I was, because I remember in second grade, my parents gave me this advice: just be yourself. And I said, that is extremely unhelpful. Which self are you talking about? What the hell? That doesn't help at all. So that was the initiation into tension. And over the next several years, up until about age 13, I got very, very good at playing the bullshit game, as everyone basically was. It was like a steeplechase for who can be the best bullshitter in those years. And there were mystical experiences on the back burner, but definitely in the back burner. They I was very much interested in being liked and being the best at whatever I was doing. And high achievement and popularity were very high on the mind. And then that all kind of, in a sense, kind of came crashing down. I hit age 13. I was probably doing, in my estimation at the time, my egoic estimation, I was doing the best that I'd done yet at that point. And I was I broke my arm one night playing baseball, and I was kind of whining about that. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna miss baseball season. I was talking with my mother before going to bed, and all of a sudden, it just, like, the words just shot out of my mouth with any forethought at all. Are you going to die soon? And it came through with sort of an intensity and a robustness that not only startled myself but startled my mom, which was strange because she was herself a very, I think, robust personality. Also 6 foot tall lady, big hands. Once punched out a purse thief with a right cross. And so then she said, no, I won't die for a while. And I was calmed down and said, okay, yeah, that was weird. Went to bed, woke up the next morning as if with a start, panting already, breathing heavily, as if I'd just been running and jumped into my body from God knows where, right at the moment that she and my father were walking outside my bedroom door. And immediately I was talking, there's something I've got to tell you. And then I couldn't remember what the hell I was supposed to tell them. I was so distraught. They had to come and kind of calm me down for about 5 minutes. I was so distraught about this thing. And that was the last time I saw them together as a parental unit. They went out on their walk. I went to school, came back home, and then my mother and I dropped my sister off, and we got in a car accident. And so in the process of that car accident, I don't know which acronym I should apply to this, NDE or ST. They come up with all sorts of things, but I essentially had everything pulled off me. I had the bullshit stripped off in the instant of basically being 100% certain that the jig was up and that this was the end of this life. There was a giant Lincoln barreling probably at 60 miles per hour at us right outside my mother's side of the car. and so had the whole life review, which I'd always been interested if that was a real phenomena or not. It seemed kind of crazy that that could happen in a millisecond, have the entire life go through it. In fact, it did, but with more detail. And in the process of that, it did feel like something was basically almost palpably, physically being unzipped. It was as if I was carrying around a massless structure that had tons of weight attached to it. And by the end of that, this was even before getting hit with the car, and just in that space, everything was, everything that I saw, everything that I felt, the words that were basically in me to describe that was, it's all been made of love the entire time. Everything that happened was absolutely perfect. I was the most alive I'd ever been. I could remember up to that point, most viscerally alive, because even looking at the sky in the distance, the sky was exploding my heart with the just bliss. And then, boom, then came the impact, and sort of being cut out of the car and having to hear later at the hospital that your mother didn't make it, and starting to go through the stages of grief in a textbook manner over the next, well, I don't think that it's ever ended in a sense, truth be told, but just a lot of the things like punching doors and all of that was going on. But something was very strange in that, which at first and for a while I thought was shock. In that period of kind of having these strong emotions going through, there was this. It was as if I didn't have a back of a head anymore, or the back of a body, in a good way. In a sense that I felt that there was this endless space, and this endless space had certain effects that were delightful. One of them was anytime I could put my attention, more or less, I could modulate my attention and put it back into the space. And when that would happen, this bliss and joy would shoot up my torso, starting from my feet, going up into my head. I wasn't afraid of anything anymore. And it was crazy in that moment of absence, it was wild to see how much I was afraid almost all the time, and being unconscious of it. And for an easy life, 13-year-old Midwestern boy, I mean, Jesus, I was thinking, like, oh my God, I've been in a straitjacket. So I was walking around not sure what to make of this, because it seemed apparent that others in my family were not having this experience. I wanted to ask my father if he was experiencing this. As soon as I started talking, this voice from way, way, way in the back, I'll say, like, out of that spot, said, "Better not this time. The answer is no." And it's wiser to sort of don't let the adults kind of muddy the waters. Explore this while it's here. And I was like, okay, sounds good. And so I kind of went with that at a certain. I still thought it was shock, and I was thinking, man, this shock shit is great. If I'd known that shock was so good, I would have instigated this process sooner. And then I went back to school, and in going back to school, it was basically, a lot of that stuff sort of faded, which was unfortunate, because then as soon as that connection to that vastness wasn't really there anymore, because I was trying to be the person I was before, it was a shit show internally. I mean, it was just suffering in a way that I had not ever experienced up to that point, emotional suffering. And I went a year. I had in some ways externally a wonderfully successful school campaign, winning all these awards and being president of the student body and this and that, and what things that I had wanted, the previous me had wanted for some time. They were so empty. And that was also painful to realize, like, all the things that were my baubles previously were so small. It was, and so it was the next summer, and I was, walking around with my big sister, who I was quite devoted to, and it's like I felt like I was Sancho Panza to her Don Quixote, and she wanted to go to a metaphysical store. I didn't necessarily want to go, but it's like, shit, okay. because I'd never wanted to go in one before. All I saw were incense and glass things hanging in the window. I thought, I don't want to go to an incense and glass thing shop. What's there for me? So I went in and I kind of gravitated, and I discovered it had a big book section in the back, and I just picked one up at random. Just open the page. It was on basically Himalayan spiritual practitioners and their experiences. I started reading a page and it sounded so similar to what I had experienced a year previous. I was hooked. I was like, really? What? More or less, they allowed me to just, as I liked, hang out in there when I could over the next basically 2 years and read all the books I want without paying for them, as long as I didn't damage them, and as long as this was my own tacit deal. I'm not sure this is an actual deal, but I would buy like a necklace or a pendant every couple of weeks, basically to pay my rent, more or less. And so sort of a spiritual search, in a sense, began. And I was in this little resort town in southeast Wisconsin, 6,000 people, but it punched far above its weight in terms of the sort of interesting people that would gravitate towards it. I honestly think it's a pilgrimage, an unrecognized pilgrimage spot. We don't really have those so much in the United States in our culture, but I think if we did, this would be one of them. And I had some amazing guides come into my life in that period, and just very freely give of their time to this 14, 15, 16-year-old kid with all these questions. And not charge me a great deal for their readings, if at all, or their services. And just that was, I'm eternally grateful to the coterie of beings that took the time out to teach me extra qigong or drive me home and almost give me satsang in a way without me even knowing that I was actually being transmitted presence. Just soaking it up. I didn't have any of these words for it. And that was, half of my teen years. The other half was being just I think a crazy neurotic teenager. And so somehow the two of them, those two tracks found a way to coexist until I was about to go into my senior year. And there was just something in me that I'd always been sort of a person who needed to do things about 200% to feel as if I was honestly doing them. There's pros and cons to that wiring, obviously. And one of them, I had been afraid of meditation for a few years. Starting at 14, I knew I had to do this meditation thing. And I had turned down learning transcendental meditation. The fee would have been great. It's me raking leaves for like 6 months for my teacher. That would have been a great fee. I could have paid that. But I knew TM did not somehow feel right, even though I was attracted to it. I was like, no, I'm not. That's not for me. I can't do it. I was also generally afraid of meditation, so I decided, well, I need to do this thing. I've been a coward, not going full bore. At least I have to go into this. So I started doing these various meditations for like 6 hours a day.
So up until this point, you had never meditated before?
No, not really. I mean, I tried. I think I naturalistically meditated, but nothing straight up. And I would sometimes, not really. I did this silly thing where I watched the Little Buddha, and I did a really poor rendition, probably, of the Heart Sutra while at the nature preserve. And no, not really at all. I did qigong, and we do meditations in yoga class and qigong. So I guess I did get a smattering, but I wasn't doing it every day in a disciplined sort of way. And a lot of psychic stuff happened, but that really was a different bird altogether.
Such a powerful story, Ishtar. And I know we probably only halfway through it at this point, but I just want to pause here because there's so many points of reflection for me as I'm listening to your story. Right? It's a beautiful, beautiful journey you've been on, and not easy by any stretch of imagination. Doesn't sound like it. Losing your mother when you were 13 years old, was it? 13?
Yeah.
It's I mean, that's a pain that I can't imagine, because I haven't lost a family member that close, that young. I've lost close family members, but a little bit later on in life, when it was in my 20s, so a bit more resilient, I feel, by your 20s than you are when you're that young.
Right.
Especially your mother, who's an active member of your life at that point.
Right.
It's different when you're an adult and you've moved on, and they're more like a satellite relationship rather than an immediate need kind
Right.
of
Right.
relationship every day. So that kind
Right.
of a void or vacuum, I can only imagine what a void that must have left in your life. At the same time, I can fully identify with what you're talking about, that what you call shock, but it's this quality when, especially in moments of deep, deep grief, of a complete
Yeah.
silencing and pushing into this wide open space where
Yeah.
real life becomes surreal and you're in this space of real deep unexplainable peace and calm, and you have no idea why, because it's not supposed to be that way based on your
Yes.
imagination of what these traumatic experiences are supposed to be like. And I'm sure it's not
Right.
like this for everybody, but it's been my experience as well, where it's almost like, am I psychotic that I'm this calm
Hmm.
when
Yeah.
loved ones have died? It's a very
Yeah.
strange kind of dichotomy. um but as I'm reflecting on your story, I don't have any memories from my really young age, like, before the age of 6 or 7, other than a couple. I have one memory from when I was an infant, and I still remember being weighed on the scale at the doctor's office in India and feeling the cold steel on my
Mm.
back. It was just the
Oh yeah.
worst. And I will never
Yes.
forget that feeling and that moment, but that's the only one I have that flashes.
Oh,
The kind of memories you have are, I think, exceptional and unusual for people to have that
mm,
detail from such a young age. But then also for me, feeling that first formation of the ego and playing with it. I used to play a
mm.
similar game to the one you did, and I'd keep staring at my hand in the bathroom and keep asking myself this question like a mantra: How am I alive? How am I alive? How am I
Ah,
alive? And each time I'd ask it, my hand would become more and more like alien to me, to the point where I'd be looking at it, not knowing what the heck I'm looking at. And then I'd immediately look in the mirror and I wouldn't know who the heck I was looking at. It would be a complete stranger. I'd
yeah.
be like, oh, this is so cool. And then I'd watch as the realization would gradually dawn. I'd be like, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to be that guy. And,
I
and then
did
there'd
that. I
be,
did that too, Shiv. I did the same thing. I called it the alien hand game. And
really,
then I would also look in the mirror and have a very similar effect. I loved the fun of having this juxtaposition
right. It's wild, isn't
happen.
it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wonder if psychologists would probably call it dissociation or whatever. But to
Mhm.
me, it felt more like reassociation. It wasn't dissociation. It was
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
reassociating myself with my true nature
Yeah.
and then going, okay, well, I got to go back to playing this again. And that would happen even when I was a pretty like energetic and passionate and emotional child. And I get into these big blowout arguments with my mother or my dad or whatever. And then in the midst of the yelling and the tears and everything, sometimes I duck into the bathroom, look at myself in the mirror, grin at myself, and then go right back out. Like, all right, we're doing great. This is the role. We're playing the part. So there was always that sense of playing with the story and the character that was there.
Mm,
But again,
mm,
going to school, I realized that this ego is what needs to protect me, because here I am, a sensitive child,
yeah.
going to boys' schools and new boys' schools every 2 or 3 years because my dad kept traveling. And when you're at a boys' school, especially back then in India, you sort of had to, on day one, prove
Oh.
at what level of that dominance hierarchy you belong, right?
Mm,
So
mm.
either you were going to come in and get your ass kicked for the first month, or you had to kick someone's ass to prove you belong there. It was just very animalistic. And I was never an aggressive person by nature. I was very sensitive, but I developed this aggression in order to, you know, preemptively protect myself. And so I'd go in there. I remember inevitably, first week there was a big fight. I was usually with the strongest boy in the class. And because he had his cronies, and it was always a question of, does this guy belong in here? What is the rite of initiation of this guy? And I would always come in and say, no, there's going to be no rite of initiation for me, and I'll prove to you why. And it was a big fight between me and the strongest boy. Either I got my ass kicked or they got their ass kicked, but either way, it was enough for people to go, okay, I think he's good. We could let him in. We'll skip the initiation. But that sort of developed this persona, which was just aggressive from or dominant from the get-go, needed to be in order to be to prove themselves to the pack, and so, but I could see I was doing it. And there was the other aspect of the chameleon nature. How do you adapt to different people in different ways? And some people are very adaptable.
Yes.
So I'm listening to your story, I see so many parallels between that. And for me, meditating began very young, and it happened sort of spontaneously around the age of 12, 13, just like you, precipitated by a traumatic event in my life, which was the sudden separation of my parents and the collapse of my world around that. And seeing it happen in a very kind of unpleasant way. So it wasn't like an amicable separation. And that triggered this out of nowhere, a question one night. I want to know who God is. At that time, I grew up in a Hindu household. Nobody questioned whether God existed. I want to know who God is. And I just began sitting in darkness every day. I didn't know I was meditating, but I just sit in darkness every evening for hours, just looking out into the darkness and a feeling it was communicating with me in this kind of voice that had no language, right? And I connect with what you're saying about that space behind you, because I could always felt in my life that no matter how consuming life became, if I just fell backward into that space, it just faded away, kind of like a dream, until I was sucked back into it, right? So I just wanted to interject there a little bit, just because as I'm listening to your story, I'm seeing so many similarities and parallels. I haven't had an NDE, but when I was in my 20s and very depressed and suicidal, I had a massive awakening experience that lasted for 4 months and rendered my mind completely silent. Prior to that, I was very emotionally depressed and needy. And in that, I saw everything was the same energy. Everything was made of love. That was just like this bliss energy that you were referring to. That was just forthcoming all the time for 4 months. And yet, it doesn't matter. I've realized now, because I've had a number of these, it doesn't matter how powerful or potent any one of these experiences are. Eventually, you come back into your mind, which now I realize is nothing else other than karma. The mind is simply the terrain of your karma. You come back into it, and there it is, still there, waiting for you. It ain't going nowhere. And we need to reconnect and renegotiate. There's just, one strategy is to step out of it and never want to come back. But it takes a lot of effort to try and sustain yourself there. And I don't believe that's necessarily the point of it. So I want to understand now, as you get back into your story and that path of what led you to what you're doing today. Walk me again through more of that transition and how you integrated what you were learning in this metaphysics shop and with these mentors of yours.
Yes. Well, God, there's a lot of territory there. We'll see how germane it is. I'll have to stitch it together. I mean, with some of those mentors, one in particular I'll mention here. He's passed on. Actually, two of them passed on, but one was by the name of Austin. I think I spent the most time with him. The first person I ever met who called themselves a quote walk-in, which was the first time I'd heard that. I heard that term actually for the next week. When I was walking through my town, I'd look at the hairdressers' shops and they say walk-ins welcome. And I was thinking, I had no idea hairdressers were so metaphysically inclined. I actually did have that thought. I have to, fit into the sort of the blonde stereotypes every now and then. Anyways, walk-in is, this man was magic. And I would go hang out with them. I would get within 100 feet of his house, and it'd feel like I was walking through some sort of phase shift barrier when I would get there. It was a little bit Edgar Casey, at least with me, and I think with many other people, because I had this retainer a clear plastic that I had to wear. It was very uncomfortable, very easy to lose because it was so transparent and small. And I was like, oh, I can't lose that. So I'd freak out every time I think I'd lose it. And my last resort would be I'd go call him, go call Austin. He'd never been in my house. I'd never described my house. I'd say, does your guidance, is what he called it, can they help me find my retainer? And he'd do it every time. And in uncanny ways. Again, he'd never been in my house, had never described it, but he'd say, in the TV room, under the left leg of the blue couch, there's a Newsweek magazine. Your retainer is inside there. I would go check it. I said, Austin, well, you're wrong this time. It's not there. He said, no, check again. You missed it. It's in the other fold. So then I go, and there it was. And this went on for, I think it was 6 or 7 occasions. The last few of them, I wouldn't have to call him. The phone would be ringing. I'd be, is he calling me? Pick it up, there he was. He would just, without any segue, start saying like, the retainer is in the bathroom. It's on that pedestal that's right by the toilet or something. So fascinating. But when I'm more interesting than that was when I'd be in his presence, I would be jacked into this vastness again, and I would have this sense that the top of my head wasn't there anymore, and I would be both in my body and just shooting out the top of my head at the same time. We would do psychic sort of tests of like he'd bring objects out. He had all these old objects, and I think he would, unless he was lying to me, I don't think he was, but he would say like, when is this from? I felt so jacked in. I would say like, you got this from this, blah 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 blah, and he would say that's exactly correct. And I was like, oh, that's, and then he would show me the provenance, the little with antiques, they'll kind of have the little piece of paper that says where it's from. And it's like, oh my God, this is crazy. I used to have these dreams as a teenager. I thought they were dreams. I'll still call them dreams, but also as a child, where I would find myself, when I would go to sleep at night, I would find myself in a very joyful, blissful sort of way, breathing in a certain way. And then I found myself floating at the top of my head, and I would go through the back wall of my bedroom and then go above the maple tree in the backyard, and I would be flying off somewhere. Often it would end right there, and I would just be, have a nice night of sleep and wake up in the morning. But sometimes I would find myself going to a certain destination, and I would recall what happened at this destination. Several of those happened in my own town. What I had called in my dreams the floating city was above my lake. I would go there. I would find myself taking lectures on subjects that in my waking life I neither had skill, knowledge, nor interest in. And yet in this dream life, I was completely transfixed and fascinated by these lectures. Sometimes I would find myself giving lectures again on topics I really had no interest in. The final one was a strange lecture on botany, which, funny enough, later on in my life became a very big interest. But at the time, as a 16-year-old, I was like, oh God, that's what my aunt does. That's not what I do. And so I woke up with the word botany on my mouth. Anyways, then 2 days later, I saw Austin again, and he met up with me. The first thing he said, I've never told him about these dreams because I just considered them dreams, nothing particularly important. And of course, what he said was, it was a great talk you gave on the ship the other night. And I was like, what do you mean by ship? And what do you mean by talk? And he said, the thing that's floating above the lake, you gave a really interesting talk on botany. And I was like, what? I was kind of incredulous. And so either this man was reading my mind in some way, and somehow my thoughts from 2 days before were somehow lingering and he could pick up on that, or we were in that same space above the lake. After that, I had numerous sorts of encounters, a couple of encounters with Austin, which I could then allow him to validate without me saying anything.
Yeah. So let me jump in here a little bit, because I know that some viewers watching are listening to this, and they're gonna their brains are spinning, right? And they're gonna go,
oh dear,
how do I make sense of this? Because obviously in our postmodern culture, there isn't much of a reference point for this. That we're very, very
No.
rational thinking, culture now, and because we're so scientifically orientated, and everything needs to be evidence-based and testable and this kind of thing.
Right.
Subjective experiences of this kind just kind of, well, there's no way to
Out,
quantify
through
that.
out the window.
So, right.
Exactly.
So now I happen to have an extremely open mind, especially over the last year. Things have shifted for me quite a bit because I've had experiences in my own meditations, and I've had out of body experiences in the past as well that don't allow me to dismiss these things offhand. I think
Mm.
there's so much value in exploring it without making any kind of, final judgments or decisions on what it all means. But I think that openness is something that's very important. But what do you say to people who generally listen to something like this and go, I have no way of even allowing this into my consciousness because my worldview does not accept that it could even potentially be a possibility?
I have zero problem with that stance because I in some ways, because I was raised with that. I mean, it sounds like my life was crazy, but I was raised in sort of a Midwestern, rationalistic, almost scientific materialism. Bordering on scientism, if we want to interject that term. And I was comfortable with that. That was not, it made sense to me. I just happened to have all this crazy shit going on while I was attempting to become a smart rationalist at the same time. And this is subjective experience has so many ways that it can be false that I couldn't possibly ever be upset at somebody for being incredulous. In fact, I encourage people to be skeptical of these things, and this is so that's basically my answer to that. This stuff has always been the window dressing to a certain extent because I think I've been felt like I probably had to share that in this interview. I don't know why. I've been more of a practical person myself. So, because even when I was having all these things going on, I was still having existential suffering, and I deeply missed that. I think the freedom and the bliss that kind of pushed the suffering out that I was experiencing previously. So even with all this stuff, I kind of was like, oh yeah, I had the OBE thing happen again, blah blah, blah. And so for me, it wasn't, it wasn't doing the trick, and so that's why it motivated me to start meditating like my hair was on fire, just to see if that was at all a possible route. So
And
yeah,
yet
this
I
is
find these kinds of subjective experiences, for whatever they're worth and whatever they are such powerful shapers of how we
yeah,
live our lives
God, yeah,
afterwards. That
yes,
that
yes,
impact can be taken away. So regardless of what the argument is outside about the validity, whether it's a hallucination of the brain,
right.
your subconscious just kind of using metaphorical language to communicate with you, doesn't matter what it is. But the
No, it doesn't.
point is, it shapes your life in such profound ways afterwards, correct?
Yeah, you're not lying there. Yeah, so internally, in my own subjective experience, if I was ever writing a memoir, they'd all go in there because they were, in some ways, also not necessarily extremely important. And actually, just to know that, for me, I had proof enough to know with many things that happened with Austin that my materialistic upbringing was wrong. I could not file things away as anomalous because things were too specific. And yeah, so I was, for my own purposes, I was certain, even though I knew it wouldn't necessarily carry over to other minds out there. So yes. There's more in the Austin file, but we don't dip into that stuff. It's been a life. I was born on Halloween, Shiv. And so every time people find that out, they say, "Oh, that explains it." So I'm just happy with that. It's catch-all junk story. Oh, he was born on Halloween. It's just been like that explanation. Uh, and so yeah, I was. Here's another one, which actually is part of a more grounded story. So I was, I think 17, and I was, sort of going to be soon college application time, and I was thinking, I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do in life at this point, which was an odd place for me to be because from when I was quite young, I had a plan that the NDE interrupted that plan completely, and I was trying to put the pieces together to figure out my direction. So it just came to me, as it sometimes did. I just asked the universe a question. I was walking through the Walmart, and I said, universe, where will I be a year from today? Because that would be a different sort of situation. And then strangely enough, I was given an answer. And so in the space in front of me in the Walmart, it's almost like a video screen appeared to me, and there was a narrator, and I saw pictures, and it said, well, funnily, glad you asked. You're actually going to be working in a mostly vegetarian cafe with a bunch of monks, many of whom wear white clothing. You'll start out as the dishwasher, and they'll train you in every job until you're a chef. And I saw a very detailed picture of what it looked like from the kitchen window, sort of looking out and seeing the space beyond. And I kind of was used to these things at this point, so it's like, okay, that's interesting. I thought highly unlikely. I just kind of threw it over my shoulder and kept on going with my life. And that's exactly where I ended up about a year later. In the intervening period, I had learned this meditation practice called the Ishayas Ascension, very strange name. It just so happened that the man who was going to be my first brother-in-law did this practice. My sister and I felt like we need to invite him first to the first meeting of the Lake Geneva Metaphysical Society. So I decided I wanted to form something to kind of congregate all the people who were similarly interested. We'd meet in the back of the public library. And so he came, and after everyone left, he and I were meditating together, and I didn't know what he was doing, but I could tell whatever he was doing, I think there was some kind of power in it. I think that it was working. He and my sister spent the whole night just talking to each other. I'm just and so it was definitely one of these meetings of destiny, the two of us coming together with him. I wasn't expecting to learn his meditation. I had become kind of a famous curmudgeon, because I would keep to my schedule. I would sort of defend it to the death from anybody who would try to throw me off my 6 hours, and I didn't. I still wanted to know what my path was. I didn't know what it was. So I was reading Yogananda's autobiography, which the experience of that for me, like for so many, was almost as if exploded my heart in the best possible way. And I was like, what the hell is going on with this book? And there's a throwaway line in there, which I didn't take as a throwaway line, where Yogananda says, anybody who asks Babaji, a question, he will surely listen. It's like, okay, I'm going to put this shit to the test, Yogananda. So I did. And I got to the deepest point in my meditation. At night, what I felt was the deepest. There was silence. And from my heart, I said, Babaji, if you're listening to some, random kid from Wisconsin, I've been looking through all these monastic brochures they've sent me, and none of them feel right. Not even the Kriya Yoga places feel right. They don't have the right music to them. I don't think that I'm supposed to go there. Could you throw me a bone here? And to my surprise, here's the get ready, rationalists, buckle your seatbelts. Actually, to my great surprise, I had actually a very pleasant sensation of something going down into the top of my head, which I wasn't afraid of, because it just was the bliss. And there was kind of a voice, and I don't know if there was Babaji or my own unconscious or whatever the hell, but the voice said, pay attention to this pitch frequency. And that was probably good language for me, because I was a bit musically inclined. And next time it comes, pay attention. That'll be your clue. So I said, okay, thanks. Thank you, Babaji, or my unconscious, or hopefully some other benevolent actor. If this is, I just kind of let that go. And then 2 days later, I was coming home, and there it was again. And as I was approaching my house, my soon-to-be brother-in-law and my sister were on the stoop out in front. And as soon as he opened his mouth, that pitch grew. And what he was asking me was if I'd like to go to a meditation course the next weekend. And with no thought to my 6-hour schedule, it was the biggest yes of my life. Internally, and I wasn't expecting much. Still, I was still not sold on this, any of this stuff. We'll see. And I went, and I never heard of this practice before. And when I came, I thought, Oh, it's a workshop. Well, workshops are for people, for baby boomers who are trying to distract themselves in a very inefficient manner from reality. So I'm like, it's only a weekend. It's not so bad. I'll be here a weekend. I'll be a spiritual anthropologist here, and see what's going on. I really didn't think the shit was going to work, but as soon as I did their techniques, I was like, what the hell? It was as if something that had been in the background of my life the whole time, that I had been flirting with, and sometimes had, you know, dipped into, to certain depth. It was as if it was there at full blast. And it was the same sense that was there during the near death experience and in the months after, but amped up. And I thought, okay, we'll see if this keeps working, and it's like, we'll see if this is a workshop high or something like that. Just thought of that term in the moment at the time. And that was that. It became increasingly clear as each day went by that I was doing their practice, that okay, I think this is probably what I have to do. So eventually I was on the phone annoying people in meditation centers to see if they would let some random 18-year-old come and live with them. And about 3 months later, I found myself in an Oregon ashram that was more or less built around that practice. And that's basically the sort of the core practice. When I go and teach meditation to people, that's sort of still my heart practice for whatever reason. So yeah.
Beautiful. And as I'm listening to your story, I see exactly where I was talking earlier about the similarities between
Mm,
our journeys, right? And I think the similarities are in the milestones and the kind of awakenings and the realizations that happened along the way. But the paths are very, very different, because I had no mentors come in, spiritual mentors,
mm,
never had one, not a single one at any
mm,
point in my life ever show up in that way. I've had a still small voice that's always guided
mm,
me, and speaks maybe once in a blue moon. But it's funny, I
right.
went to pick up a used um, deep freezer for my wife the other day on Facebook Marketplace. I show up there and the guy is showing me the deep freezer, and something seems off about it. I'm not quite sure. And this voice comes out of nowhere and goes, "Don't buy this." And I just said, sorry, and I walked away. It turned out it was a broken freezer. They're trying to con you into buying, right? Because then I went and checked the reviews of these people on Marketplace and found that they've scammed other people before. So little things like that, right? It always come out. So in that sense, yes, maybe, I feel like there's been some guidance that's always been there in the background that hasn't come from my mind, specifically the active part of my mind, that's
Mm,
the ego and all of that. But in terms of wild mentors like Austin, who have had such a deep impact on your life,
mm,
none of that. Um, Also, I haven't you know really had I wouldn't say the exposure, but I haven't had the interest to learn any techniques from other people. So mine has been a
mm,
very, very kind of solitary path of learning from the immediate, everyday, mundane reality and the challenges of that, from where all that insight has come. And I find there's so many ways. Like, this is why I love talking to people on this podcast, is wildly ranging
right.
paths, like wildly ranging backgrounds and lives, and how they have all sort of arrived here. When I talk to Stephen next week, I'm going to go a little bit into his backstory, and his is completely different. I mean, this guy's in Bitcoin. It's nothing to do with anything we're talking about that's could be even remotely metaphysical. And yet, when people like that get into a room together, they're all nodding, going, "Yeah, that's my experience too," even though their lives sound nothing alike. And that's what I find so fascinating about life, is that the context is almost irrelevant. It's like these there seems to be certain key components that are common, in
Yeah.
that trauma is always a part of it. There's always some kind of catalyst that is a traumatic catalyst in some way or the other. And this sort of awareness of something outside of what the mind is, and the constant
Mhm.
departing from it and coming back to it, departing from it and coming back to it through the process of life. And for example, in my, my recent life, I've gone through certain challenges myself that I've written about on my blog and all of that. If you had asked me 5 years ago or even 2 years ago if I'd be back in this space again, I'd say no fucking way. Never gonna happen. I'm beyond that, right? Like that, I've gone through all that. It's all in my past. Like I've that kind of suffering, I'm just not capable of again. I would have said that to you, hands down, without blinking an eye. And it's almost like you get to that point of you're so sure about reality that something just comes along like, oh, just knock you right over, right? Like upset that apple
Yeah.
cart. And it's important to have that happen over and over again because there's this dialogue that's constantly happening with reality that only flows when you're in that open space of I don't really know what this is. That mysterious quality about it has to exist. And it's so easy to lose that as you grow older because you just become more and more entrenched in what you know.
That's
Right.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so I consider it a blessing when I'm put into these very, very painful and challenging kinds of circumstances. It's never fun to go through. It's it impacts not just you, it impacts other people around you. That's more the most painful part of it because I'm used to going through shit myself. I have no problem going through, I can kind of roll with the punches. But when you see that, spilling out and the collateral damage of that affecting innocent people in your vicinity, people whom you love, loved ones, and all of that, and you go, oh, really? Is that necessary? Like, what do they have to do with any of this? And yet
Yeah.
it's inseparable. It's bound to happen. It's kind of their karma too. And um, so talk a little bit about what your process of life is like today. We've talked about your past, but what is your present like in terms of, your clarity, your awareness, challenges you go through, and how you negotiate all of that?
God, well, I found that, what you articulated, this sort of confident notion that certain territories in the past, that's definitely in the last 5 years, I think has come back. So this is some component, more an internal component of life, and it deals with grief. And there were, my training over 6.5 years in sort of a semi-cloistered environment that was very intense, and certainly it was almost designed to gouge shit up. And in that process, I found silence, and later that silence started to spread, and the sense of self and others started to collapse. And at a certain point, I was very confident, like, oh man, this shit's really together here, and several couple 2 3 4 times over since that must have been about 17 years ago. The first bit of being kind of cocksure. In the last few years, I've discovered it's been a process of embracing these parts of a 13-year-old boy who was crushed, for instance, to get really, really specific and personal. There were parts of heavy grief that I'll say almost in the body, frozen in the body, as it were, that no amount of the sadhana that I was doing probably could have touched. I do have faith that there's this kind of capital I intelligence that in a sense knows how much it can load us up with stuff, that knows how far that it should put the challenge. Maybe it's a naive confidence, but it's a sense, but it's there for me. And that's been part of this process, softening into that, being able to again and again, like, I was trained to do this, but it's still, when it comes back, it's almost as if have I really been trained to do this, because it's sort of kicked up a notch. So that healing aspect's been part of that. That's for sure, the last few years. Also becoming, in some ways, becoming an adult. It's as if I'm having to raise up that sort of that frozen child, in a certain sense, and say, like, lots going on in the past few years, and I'm not doing that through fancy footwork. Sometimes I am having a conversation because that seems to help, but it's almost like just being open to these unprocessed emotions, and sitting in calm, sitting in presence and allowing it to come from out of the wilderness and come and sit at the campfire of the self, in a sense, just like you would with a shelter dog who's been abused. You sort of have a lot of patience and love, and you feed it, but you let it come to you on its own time, in a very similar manner with this.
So
So
amazing that you
that's
use the analogy of the shelter dog,
mm,
because that's something that the analogy of a dog is what I've been using with myself for quite some time in the last, I'd say, a month or two, as I become acquainted with my mind in a way that I would never was before. It's almost strange. I would always uphold my mind as this, really ingenious, intelligent mind. And
mm,
yet, in my own private relationship with it, I would kind of look down upon it as this lesser being, right? As this thing that clearly has these needs that it never seems to be able to
you
transcend.
stupid monkey
Yeah,
mind,
yeah,
you
right, right.
idiot.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
it wasn't even. I wouldn't even say it was verbal. It's just an attitude of arrogance towards the mind.
yeah. Mm,
And as I've gone through this process of realizing, very similar to you, that my 11, 12, 13-year-old self still exists and will act out because of unresolved stuff that I thought I had resolved like ages ago. Ages ago. I thought I was done and dusted with that stuff. And it keeps coming back.
mm,
It's funny. My wife slapped me down the other day as we're talking, and she goes, you have this amazing mind, but it also becomes a double-edged sword for you. And you don't understand that sometimes there's that 11 or 12-year-old that still
yeah.
needs to come out and assert and throw a tantrum about the world. And I know she's right because I've seen it, and I just have always chosen not to. But there's that anger of the 11-year-old still there that
Mm,
informs the attitudes towards the way we engage with life. And
yeah.
what's shocking is all the awareness in the world, all the spiritual experiences, all the awakenings doesn't change that fact. That still needs to be brought up, that still needs to be faced, that still needs to be given perspective to. And so that analogy of a dog is very similar to what the way I have come to see my mind is. It is a programmed entity. It is actually not capable of coming up with anything original. All it does is take in inputs through a lifetime and just reprocesses and repackages that input in the form of emotions and thoughts and things like that. But eventually, all it can do is work with what it already knows. It has no concept of what it doesn't know. And so the
Mm,
only way that my own mind can be educated, not educated in the sense of be taught something, but to grow and evolve, is if there is this connection, this benevolent connection between awareness, which is just this open kind of attention towards the unknown aspects of life. Right? My awareness doesn't presume to understand anything. It doesn't even have a voice. It's just openly aware of what's going on at all times. And in that, when there's a connection between that and the mind is open enough to receive, is receptive to it, somehow without intention in the background, changes begin to gradually happen in the way it
mm,
operates. There's
mm.
this deep trust and faith-based relationship that doesn't happen when there's an antagonistic approach towards the mind.
Well, yeah, yeah, and a lot of people think of sort of the sort of separate selfing mechanism. We could say the ahamkara, if we would get in fancy Sanskrit footwork, as sort of something that clenches, and so people have I think it's their enemy, but it doesn't just know how to clench; it does know how to let go. It does know how to relax. It's not a full idiot. And I found that, like I could call it the silence or the stillness or the formless. I use the term the formless, but if the formless has a form, which it does, one of the better words for it is love. And so for me, the whole process, all these years, has simply been one of going into the formless, having the formless, produce the love in a sense, or well, the love's already there, so it doesn't have to be produced by you. Get what I mean? And that love is just like water, basically, going through all the nooks and crannies of the body, of the psyche, of the mind, or whatever, however you want to classify this Russian doll of our being that we inhabit. And the love is just sort of going and moving around at its own pace in the best way possible. And that to me is the slow, that is awakening. I mean,
Yeah, and
that is
that's an
the whole
analogy
process.
that's an analogy that exact analogy is something I used recently when I said that my mind is like this canyon formed, but it's got its own unique
Mm,
sort of
yeah,
formation. It's
yeah,
essentially the karma. And this awareness flows like water through it, but the awareness has no power of its own. It's just flowing at all times. It has no choice but to follow the contours of that mind. And yet, just like water, it gradually erodes away in a very non-violent way, right? Because that erosion is,
yes,
it's almost imperceptible. It's so gradual, but it
yeah,
erodes away at that, creating that space, gradually creating more and more
yes.
space. And that is something that I've come to see has been the case now as I reflect back. Because prior to this, and sounds like it might have been a bit different for you, I didn't love my mind. I would
Mm,
say that I've always had a somewhat, I would not hostile, but a mistrust of it. And
yeah,
the more awake and present and things I've always been able to be, it's more like I'm succeeding in dealing with that slight nuisance that I have in my life, right? And I will learn to use it, and I will sharpen it and hone it, but I don't particularly love it. It's this necessary evil that have to
mm,
kind of live
mm.
with. But that's not the way I look at it anymore,
It's good.
right?
Yeah, you're being talked. You're sort of being talked down of a world weary Gnosticism, and brought into more of a purely tantric space that embraces everything. It's wonderful. Yeah, that's my personality has always interested me. I was in theater as well. I found that actually a very spiritual experience, or at least one I could say that produced interesting quote spiritual content. And so for a while, yeah, the Buddhist books, I'm not shitting on Buddhism here, but they're mostly, those were what was my library had. The Buddhist books are always, quite skeptical of self and anything with a form. And they were really trying to shoot the hell out of it, truth be told. And so at first I thought, oh, they must be true. That must be right. But as we went over, I realized that the more people get immersed in presence, the more people get immersed in that formless, they don't become these cardboard vanilla um, non, empty sacks that have no color. They suddenly were freed up to be the most technicolor, multidimensional, full expression that we were designed to be. I basically think that every person is more or less a beautiful stained glass window, like you find at Chartres Cathedral or something like that. Everybody are these exquisite pieces of art that are meant to loudly even if they're a quiet type, loudly exclaim the lines that the universe is basically trying to say through them. We are that there has to be that to use there has to be that Zorba part of the Zorba the Buddha to borrow from Osho. And I found that to be the case. I haven't found any in my life yet. I haven't found any like people who are essentially themselves who are boring. They're always terribly interesting, eccentric, even if they're not the type of eccentric that I would get along with. I could appreciate like, oh man, they're really whatever the hell they're supposed to be, and I'm loving it. That's wonderful. Yeah.
So why do you think so many seekers and spiritual practitioners do get stuck in that sort of dull, life denying state of emptiness as they get into the meditation practice? Because that's really, that phenomenon is what got me started in writing, because I saw there's so
Mm.
much of this mimicking that happens
Oh yeah.
in the new age and spiritual culture of trying to get into the space of equanimity. Well, you can't fake equanimity, and when you try, it
No.
becomes this very dull kind of blah existence, which is really kind of
Yeah.
like glorified depression. And yeah, you're not feeling much, but that's because you've basically sedated yourself to the point of like, well, I'm not up, but I'm not down, but I'm just kind of here. And it's not enjoyable. Like they'd like to
No.
say it's enjoyable, but it fucking sucks. And they're not
Yeah.
themselves. They
Yeah.
have no senses of
No.
humor, right? That's
No.
number one red flag for me is if you don't have a sense of humor, there's something off about you because human beings are naturally humorous people. When a person laughs,
Yes.
their true self comes out.
Yes.
All right. No matter
Yeah.
how like well trained they are to keep that perfect facade and exterior, the moment you get them laughing, their true self comes out, and you see this very sort of practiced and controlled sense of humor in spiritual circles. That's like, man, that joke really sucked. How are you guys even pretending to laugh at this thing?
Oh God.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's so prevalent, right? What my
Yeah.
own take is, my own sort of idea is this: no spiritual journey can even begin until an awakening happens. That when I look back on my life and I look back on what I was doing prior to my first awakening at the age of 22. Yeah, I was reading books and I was meditating, and but none of that meant anything. It was all just up here, just ideas of ideas of ideas and opinions about those ideas. But when that first awakening happened, similar to yourself, I was like, what the fuck just happened? It just like blows your mind right open. And then I remember my dad saying to me, "Oh, sounds like you had a peak experience." I'm like, "Peak experience?
Oh.
What the heck is a peak experience?" And he goes,
Oh,
"Oh,
your dad was tuned in, Shiv. My
oh
God,
yeah, my
Maslow,
yeah,
Dr. Maslow.
my dad definitely had that background to it." And he goes, "Oh, by the way, read this guy Eckhart Tolle." Never know.
That,
And I pick up The Power of Now,
nice.
and I'm reading about I'm reading about his spiritual enlightenment experience and then how he saw the world. I'm like, wait a second, this guy's like
Yeah.
word for word describing everything that happened to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
That started the spiritual seeking. Because now I'm like,
Yeah.
let me go find the guys who know what the heck they're talking about.
Yeah.
And then I listened to Adi Shanti and some others, but then it kind of went into this non-dual rabbit hole of like, oh, well, you're only the awareness. And there's no context to
Oh
any
yeah.
of this other stuff. Well, how are you going to teach me to deal with my 13-year-old self that's still, as you said,
Yeah.
frozen
Right.
inside
Right.
me and not going there?
Right. Right.
And I think it then becomes this great opportunity to, well, bypass the whole thing. It's a
Yeah.
one-stop shop to getting out of town, Dodge, and never coming back. It's
Oh
an
yeah.
option, right? So what in your
Yeah.
mind is contributing to that sort of miasma, and that's
Mm.
it's really like a killing of the life
Well,
force in a way.
I mean, there's many factors. First, in no particular order, actually. First, to echo you, some people just haven't tasted the fucking chocolate, and they've been eating carob, and they think it's awesome, but it's not. That's one thing. I mean, like you say, you kind of need to taste somewhere to kind of trigger this, and so you have to hear middle C, whatever, to tune back into it. And actually everybody has. Everyone, even the most stressed life has had peak experiences. We just tend to forget about them until something big comes around that we're like, oh my God, that space when I was, looking in the puddle when I was 5. Jesus, I had no idea. So that's one thing. Bad teachings and bad teachers and blind leading the blind. That certainly is a big chunk of the marketplace as well. That's the case. The people, of maybe not a lot of non-skillful means are part of that in terms of people trying to pawn off equanimity as this kind of fake thing. you know oh yes, I'm going to speak and use certain vocabulary now, and it just then the chimpanzee dynamics ensue when we get into groups, and people are like, yes indeed, this does feel good, but it doesn't. That's part of it. Of I was grateful in a sense. I didn't get sort of roped into the quote unquote neo-Advaita world, which I'm not, I don't think is all bad. Nothing's all bad, nothing's usually all good. But I was glad that I was in a very I'll put it, shaktified environment. So I got to have silence and shakti. and and that there was an emphasis also, it's like you couldn't just hide in meditation. You can't see, and if you're sitting on a feeling, you're not in silence. Things like that were just known premises. It's like, no, you can't be sitting on some shit and hiding from it and be in awareness. You could make believe that you're in awareness, but you're making believe. And so allowing emotions to flow was an important part of the process, allowing healing to happen in all the seemingly messy ways that it needs to happen was seen as part of the process. Getting out of the fucking way of the body, making the adjustments that it needs to make in order to hold for silence was understood as part of the process. And so another thing is that some people are just not comfortable with feeling at a certain level. Like if you notice, a lot of the Neo-Advaita groups skew male. I'm not going to say males are male and intellectual. I'm not saying that an intellectual male, because I was raised as an intellectual male, I'm not saying all are afraid of their feelings, but I have to say a lot are, and they associate feeling with messiness and chaos, or whatever the hell, instability. I don't know, but that's just an unfortunate cultural thing. I think, or maybe a little bit biological. I don't know, and so that that's something that's endemic to the space. Just the fear of letting the big pot of repressed emotion that started getting filled at age 6 months, letting that erupt because the body needs it the hell out. That's just something that takes sometimes a little bit of pluck and courage. And God knows I certainly ran away. I had my share of sort of running away and avoiding those necessary cathartic moments. But that's also a component there. So
How necessary do you think it is for somebody to have a spiritual teacher, or spiritual guidance? My own approach, especially in my writings, has always been primarily also dictated by my own life experiences where I didn't have one, right? So I'm more like the self-taught guitarist who's riffing away on stage.
Yeah.
People love the music, and I go, well, you can teach yourself. You don't really need somebody to sit and teach you how to pick up a guitar. Right. At the same time, I'm fully open to the idea that one can be taught how to play the guitar. But my argument is fundamentally this, is that people can teach you spiritual practices. People can teach you meditation. People can teach you yoga. People can teach you techniques in how to do things in a practical manner. But teaching you your own spirituality is literally like trying to teach you how to be in your own body, right? It's something that nobody has any reference to, but it's the most obvious thing. And so the moment a person leaves themselves in order to go outside of themselves to learn how to be back in themselves, it's a very kind of circuitous way of scratching your nose from behind your head. And that's always been my approach, where I said, no matter where you are in your life, and it could be the depths of fucking hell, or it could be, angels could be singing in the background. It doesn't matter. None of that. Whatever is happening for you right now, that is where the entrance point is to your spirituality. Because people have this idea of what spirituality looks like. They think it is that peace, it is that equanimity, it is that state in which we are perfectly aware or perfectly present or at one with what is, and all of that. And my thing is, well, that's one version of spirituality. Spirituality can also be, being in the depths of hell and bawling your eyes out, or grieving, or having a huge argument, or flipping someone off in the car. All of that is spirituality. Spiritual practice is literally the living of every moment of your life. All of that is contributing in some way to it. And this idea that spirituality is somehow separate from the act of living and can be made into this other path that then will bring us back to a more authentic life is what I sort of contend with. Because I find that although when I look back on my life, there has been a path to getting there, at no point can I say that path hasn't been fully integrated with life as it is. right? And so when people are looking for a spiritual path, they tend to unconsciously believe that it's something other than what this life is, and that a master or a teacher is going to show me how to walk that path. Whereas the way the Tao puts it, the Tao Te Ching is, the way is the one you're walking. The Tao they call Tao is not the real Tao. It's literally the way is what is happening. And the courage and the willingness and the openness to finally see that your life in the way it's unraveling is your highest path you could be taking.
Yeah.
That's something that even if we grok intellectually, most people are just not willing to accept. They're like, it's got to be something, even a smidgen of an alternative to this. And it's that stark inevitability of everything that I find is the most powerful teacher. And that's the one thing that most of us struggle to listen to, is that life at the end of it, regardless of how many mystical experiences one may have had, regardless of how many beings one might have interacted with in this world or another realm, all of it, regardless of not NDEs or having communicated with another metaphysical reality, if that is your inclination, all of that, regardless of the life experience, regardless of all of it, at the end of the day, there's an inevitability to life that is unquestionable, right? It is what it is. And if we align to that, that is like the most powerful teacher that can be. And it doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a
one of those easier said than done things too. But yes,
way easier said than it's almost too easy.
Absolutely.
It's way too easy. That's the problem, right? Like that level of simplicity is just it's shocking to the point that it shatters everything that we could possibly ever want to do. It's unbearable in its simplicity, right?
Yeah, I absolutely, I can't disagree. I don't think there's no formula. You don't have to check off the box. Got to find the external person to do the job. That may never come. It may be the way. I think everybody's got scripts in a sense. I think of it in that theatrical sort of way, and if the script of this particular rivulet is demanding you to move 2,000, 6,000 miles around the world, in order to sort of flow better into the ocean, then that's the thing. Of course, it's hard to tell in the moment if that's the case or not. Perhaps we often have to kind of experiment and roll the dice in the moment and see what happens. But some lives may be peppered with guides, of some lives that may be sparse, of it's whatever's. When I think of a guide, it's the deepest teachers of in my life, they've never, it's always been quite informal. In fact, they're often the nature of that relationship would not be spoken of at all. It was as if I'm just with older friends who I just had an easy, natural resonance with. And in my case, it was very clear that they were, in a sense, more skilled musicians in the notes of presence than I was at the time. So for me, it was like going and sitting with the musician that I loved being in the presence of, and having a jam session, only we're playing awareness, we're playing the nervous system. And so, that was so lovely and delightful, and yet at the same time humbling, because I also would be with people who I could hear all of my wrong notes. And, and some of these people, I could feel them, not in an invasive way, but in a wholly natural way. They were already inside me. And sitting in presence, and I'd be like, all right, this is making my skin crawl, because I'm, at the time I was very, worried about how poor I was at so many things. And what do people think if they can see that? But, with these friends and mentors, it was like, oh, okay. And that was my script. And of course, it might be completely different for somebody else. I've always been of the strategy, to just go wholehearted as much as you can wherever you are. Be in integrity. With don't abandon rationality, for God's sakes, but go wholehearted, go mind, heart, body, soul, put it all into what seems right, and see what happens. And yeah, that's.
So let's talk about the being in integrity part of it, because there's so many people, we've seen this with spiritual teachers, even really good ones, who've completely gone off the rails in lots of ways, right? And they seem like, the geniuses in the way they deliver their discourses. Clearly their ideas have impacts because they garners great followings and things like that. I'm thinking of people like Chogyam Trungpa or Osho, who you mentioned earlier. And yet when
Lots
you
of
look
dirty
at
laundry.
lots of dirty laundry, right? And you had posted recently on your Facebook, who was that? It's Carlos Castaneda, right?
Oh yeah, Castaneda.
For four agreements and the
That's
darkness.
Don
And
Miguel Ruiz, so let's not throw
sorry,
him
sorry,
in
sorry.
in
Okay.
that task. Yeah.
So Castaneda wrote, correct my, because I've mixed them up.
All those books, what, Journey to Ixtlan or something like that,
Right.
1970s.
So, right. And Gurdjieff has his own dirty laundry. And what is your take on that? Because is that an integrity thing? Because there's that ethical aspect to human nature and behavior and all of that. And there seems to be, in a lot of these cases, exploitation of other human beings where the intention is to not only do no harm, but to bring benefit, right? So when the end result becomes one of grievous harm and confusion and disillusionment and all of that, I know a lot of spiritual seekers and things will rationalize that away as well. That was the crazy wisdom. And after all, it is beneficial. It's all inevitable anyway. And we're not arguing that everything is inevitable. I mean, Hitler was inevitable, and all the atrocities that happen are inevitable, but that doesn't mean they need to happen, and we need to kind of perpetuate them either. Right. So it's this, balance. And I want to get your understanding of, so where does that integrity piece come in? And how does anyone working in this sphere of life, when they're deeply responsible to the people they're communicating with, there's an accountability there, maintain that accountability in a way that doesn't exploit people because they're so suggestive and susceptible when they are in these scenarios?
Well, one, I think it's very, I think it's very true understanding to look at a lot of these people and who've really fucked up and done some harm, and often at best it's a case of uneven development. So I'm just looking at the best cases there. At worst, it's just total con artist, and maybe no development anywhere. But at best, we might have people who are in a sense a genius of transforming the nervous system in some ways, who have themselves traumatized children inside themselves, which are causing them to behave in all sorts of grievous kind of ways. My solution is kind of unsexy and practical. Usually it's, and I think this is a nascent science, I think, in some ways, but with an emphasis on the word nascent. So I think we're going to be probably groping around in the dark at best, for a few more generations as we figure out how to work this, how to police it also in a way that you don't squelch it. Because I also at the same time see a certain use for a little bit of craziness, not in a harmful way, but it's the same with comedy. Comedy doesn't work if you're kind of you can't be an improv artist if you're thinking too much. And so there's similar sorts of skill sets and spaces that you want to have people be able to be do without thinking and let the universe move through, and then you just don't want them being serial rapists or stealing everybody's money or whatever else. So my unsexy solution is just to have programs where people are going and developing their psyche and making sure that they're healing inner children, making sure they're doing something where they're healing trauma, making sure that as we discover these different vectors of development, that they are getting attended to, and not having people waltz out there and becoming gurus. And I don't know. Once there's like a bunch of cash in a safe in your compound, and maybe a couple of handguns, and you find yourself with a revolving door of young mistresses, and maybe you're having people 24/7 make sure that nobody that no cranes come and eat the fish in your personal pond. Those would be sorts of things where you'd say, like, those would be red flags you set up ahead of time, say like, there might be something amiss here, so maybe we should double check. I think having a peer group, if not having some kind of wise teacher who's maybe more experienced, but certainly having that and having peer groups, those are very helpful sorts of setups too, so that you're not on an island where you have nobody to talk to anymore, and you become sort of the unquestioned voice to your flock. That's a very bad recipe for human beings, and that seems to be part of it. I'm not an expert on this. People who are some of the people associated with the Association for Spiritual Integrity, I think they're pretty tuned into some of the best practices here, but this is just the stuff off the top of my head. I don't know. Moving to sort of Costa Rica, if one finds themselves, I'm being a little humorous here, obviously. If one finds himself in Costa Rica, deciding to interpret the Book of Revelations in a new novel way, and telling everybody to, like, on one level hunker down for the apocalypse, on another level have as much sex with me as possible. There should be some little notes that one sends to their future self that one attends to. But yeah.
So I know we're doing a lot of this in tongue in cheek, because we're talking
Yes.
about extreme examples here as well of
Yes.
cult-like behavior. But even within the normal milieu of what we'd say is the ordinary spiritual teacher, who's not particularly doing any kind of nefarious kind of shit, there is this there are layers of disingenuity that come in, right? And
Right.
I've seen this happen with even the best teachers out there. And in terms of, when I say best, I mean who come across as the most genuine, is there is a general culture of a little bit of us putting a little bit of spin on everything, a little bit of a positive bias, a little bit of a positive skew, to create a feel good response in the mind of the listener to the teaching. Because
Right.
really, in reality, the teaching, if there is a teaching that is meant to reveal any kind of truth in any way, or induce the listener to confront the truth in any way, that teaching has to cause more discomfort than comfort, because the truth is just naturally, by nature, uncomfortable to
I don't
face.
know about that. I can't quite fully agree with that, but I agree where you're going in general with the audience capture and sort of putting a bullshit saccharine patina on things. But at the same time, truth is often uncomfortable. Sometimes it's the most damn comfortable thing you ever face as well. So yeah.
So let's talk about that. What are the some of the uncomfortable aspects of a, of a person confronting that truth in their lives through a spiritual teaching? And then, I think we agree on the comfortable aspects of it: the enhanced
Yeah.
awareness, the feelings of bliss and expansion, and all of that,
Right.
and realizations and insights that come in. But at the end of the day, there's something resistant within the system. That's why we struggle through life
Right.
in the first place. That's going to fight back against it. And that's, I think,
Yes. Yeah.
more where the discomfort comes from. And I guess what I'm saying is, in the past, when I was that kind of seeker and I'd go and listen to these talks and things like that, often there was a sort of addictive quality to it, because it was typically in the midst of feeling very confused and disorientated. And they
Right.
listen to one of these, and it's almost like that perfect joint hit, where all that stress just fades away, and it feels very relaxed about it. And it makes there's this welling of positivity and hope and optimism for the future,
Right.
which after the talk begins to fade away, and then you come
Oh,
back for it again.
you see that as kind of a nefarious thing that's maybe
No,
being
no,
that's
not.
a little bit no.
I wouldn't say nefarious. I would say it's a positive bias that is inserted into the equation, often unconsciously, because the culture
Right.
does it.
Yes.
The
Like
culture
audience
does it.
capture too.
like
Yes,
audience
yes,
capture,
yes,
whatever it is. Like just like the
yes,
stand-up comedian's
yeah,
got to do his thing
yes,
to keep the people there. You don't want them all walking away
right,
because this is way too uncomfortable to listen to. And so there's a little bit of that if you do this, then you will experience this kind of
right, right.
insinuation in there that again is not necessarily nefarious. I think when a whole culture is acting in a certain way, it's very easy to sort of okay, this is the way we do this, and you could have all your deepest realizations possible, but when you communicate it, what kind of biases and prejudices are being inserted in there? A lot of that is so subconscious.
Mm.
So, so my I guess because yes, I don't want to say well, that's a very absolute statement to make that it's the truth is always uncomfortable. Maybe not, but there is a very uncomfortable aspect to it. However, when you listen to a lot of teachers, it doesn't create discomfort in the system. So, what
Oh
is
yeah,
being left out, in your opinion?
yeah. Well, it can be the case that I totally agree. Some people are modifying in order to keep the cheeks in the seats, or keep the cheeks in the seats a bit longer. That's for sure. Other people might be doing that, but or perhaps they're not doing that. They're supposed to be a bit comforting at the time. It's hard to say. Funnily enough, most of the teacher figures who were in my life were kind of the opposite. They almost seemed to be uh, saying things and behaving in ways that would drive people away. So I kind of, got a very different thing than that. But yeah, I like to see it. I like to, there's a certain. I would have loved to have been around just as an anthropologist in a way, a spiritual anthropologist, to see Nisargadatta carrying on in the way that he was in his little loft above his shop, and seeing what that was like for people. Uh, I can't disagree with you that's unfortunate. Probably there
Well, it
need to be
seems
some
like
more
money
spiritual
is
spoofers.
right. It
Yeah,
seems like it almost seems like money is the sort of ingredient that causes the skew, right? And if you
yeah,
harken back to kind
absolutely.
of the old Zen books and how Zen masters approach their student, they were pretty ruthless and uncomfortable to be around. It's just like really
Yeah,
abrasive characters, right? Obnoxious,
yes.
abrasive, and generally infuriating because no matter how earnest you were, they just told you didn't know fucking what you're talking about. And so again, I'm not emulating that environment, saying it's any better, but you don't see a lot of that
I,
anymore because everything is so
I
sort of
think, more important than necessarily just having abrasive characters, which I'm all for. I don't think that would be the sole solution. I think, another is for simply people to remind as frequently as possible, this is all in you. You might think there's something going on because you're maybe even are feeling this great tuning fork resonance with the guy up here, but it has nothing to do with here at all. So enjoy this, but don't feed on it. Don't think you're going to feed on it for the rest of your life. Go back and into your normal life, and that's where you're going to find whatever you think you're finding here, because it is there. And I think there almost has to be constant sort of breaking up with some kind of group to teacher or person to teacher dynamic in some way, and probably in many different ways as there are different situations. That has to be constant. Like some people maybe have to be told, like, stop coming to these satsangs. They're not doing you any more good. Go and go and work in a garden for a while. Go do this. Go do something else. And then if you feel like coming back, come back. No, that's
well,
and
Ishtar, I
I think a lot of teachers do need to be. It is a very challenging thing. It's like in the West, we don't really necessarily have like a strong sadhu culture where people are donating to renunciates and doing that sort of thing, and where you can have like spiritual teachings for free and such. And in the West, it's a little bit of a different tap dance for people operate. I know this for sure. There's all sorts of things you have to check when money's involved, and I think it's actually very good for teachers to not sink their own ship, But in essence, let people know that, don't become dependent, don't pay money for this thing, and have, people have to check in and have the integrity not to upsell where it's inappropriate, or not to sell in a certain extent. And that's a balance I don't have any kind of single equation that fits all situations, because it's too complicated, right? For how to not fall into that BS. But yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think it's a particularly hard balance to try and strike, especially in today's culture, especially with social media and the way everything is monetized to the point,
Right.
and often because of social pressures, right? Just like there
Right.
isn't a sadhu culture, there actually isn't a culture that supports even the normal individual or seeker who's going through their dark night of the soul to say,
No.
hey, here's a
No.
little cloister or little retreat that
Right.
where you can go
Exactly.
and you'll be supported. Don't worry, 3 months. You don't have to worry about where your food comes from, your shelter comes from.
Right.
Sit here and process your shit. That's been a
Yes.
part of most indigenous and ancient cultures. And
Right.
it's been a part of Indian culture, it's been a part of Christian culture. That supportive space for people to go through their own spiritual processing,
Yes.
that doesn't exist
Yeah.
anymore. There's no wiggle
And
room.
it breaks my heart. Shiv always has that there's no sort of culture that supports pilgrimage, to harken back to a good old-fashioned Christian word. It's just not there, and so many people need that, just in seeking. Yeah.
So beautiful talking to you, Ishtar. I've really enjoyed this, and I know it's pretty late for you because that afternoon sun that you had in the windows
it's
is long
gone.
gone.
Yeah. It's long gone. Bye.
But I'm sure this is a conversation I think a lot of viewers and readers will enjoy watching, and hopefully, we can do this again sometime, because I think there's a lot that we brought up today, points of discussion, but I think there's a lot more we could talk about.
Yeah, I'd like to dig into your life. I'm quite interested in the nuggets you share with me. There are definitely similarities
Absolutely.
that I'm keen to plumb.
Yeah, let's save that for part 2 whenever we decide to do that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, have a beautiful day. I'm gonna stop the recording now, but hang around for just a couple more minutes and we'll chat in the backstage there.